converted man. Here, the Christ myth theory, or Jesus mythicism, is a view that Jesus is fictional, made up. There was no historical Jesus at all, and is completely fabrication. So there's a prevailing uh, idea against this that says, well, no, all the experts say that Jesus probably existed. There was a historical Jesus, probably lived in first century. He was probably both baptized and probably crucified. I love the probablys that you have to throw in there. And then the other stuff, well, we don't know about that. But that part, yeah, sure, those parts happened. Why just those? Those are the parts that we can we can be sure about. They say. Well, all these scholars of the Bible, the New Testament, they spent years becoming and being scholars. So the main historicity of that, the prestige of that, the upholding of that legacy is to continue the history of upholding this idea. If you challenge it, you're an outlier. You're scorned, and you're looked down on. And it's like, oh, how can you say that? You're just so silly. You're ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, look at how many things we have. Okay, well, really, there's only the 3 or 4 things that talk about Jesus, and then later people talk about him. But yeah, I mean, that's good enough, right? I mean, yeah, he did the magical stuff, but that's legendary. Okay, so the consensus doesn't make it true. And that the experts, those people that study the New Testament, these are the people who are saying, well, of course this guy existed. Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of your whole job relies upon this mattering, right? And that the tradition of this guy existing is really hard to go against. Because then you look like the outlier. And some have. Um, but I think that there's plenty of ways that Christianity could have gotten started without Jesus at all being an actual person. I think that he could have been completely fictional to begin with. So rather than looking at the New Testament stories, which, were written long after Jesus supposedly was around, I'm going to go back before that. But go back. And I don't know how far back you need to go. I don't really think you need to go that far back. It's certainly plausible that a legendary account can arise within a single generation, let alone multiple generations. And all we have to do is take a more modern example of Mormonism. You have Joseph Smith, who said, hey, I found, these golden tablets, and, made up this story and convinced Oliver Cowdery, convinced his wife, kind of. And that's all you need. You need 2 people on board initially, even if they're tentatively on board. And then you need to start telling other people the story and them to get on board even a little. And then the movement starts building. And the story becomes more complicated as time goes on, and it doesn't matter if efforts are hampered. One of the stories that was penned by Smith, um, I don't know the names offhand, but one gal took it and hid it or destroyed it or whatever, or I think she hid it because she wanted to preserve it. But she's like, oh well, if you're legit, then you can go back to the source and get a copied again, and so he came up with a completely new story, and she's like, yeah, that's fake. See, I've got the. And but it didn't matter. It didn't matter because people were already believing it, and it didn't matter that she had counterfactual information. So this is my story, and it is a story. I can't prove it. That's not the point of this. The point is to lay out a plausible, possible account of how Christianity got its start. So the Jewish people were in a community where there was lots and lots of mystery cults, lots of different deities being worshipped, and their god was one of many different gods that was worshipped. Times were tough, lifespans were short, food was not very good. You had Rome in charge, and they were not that great. So it was rough. And so you got somebody that's Jewish thinking, this whole thing that I have to do, I have to sacrifice a lot of my animals and food to the rabbi. That's unfair. That keeps me poor. Why would God do that? Why would God need that? Okay, well, maybe God needs a sacrifice, but maybe what if God gives us a sacrifice that makes it so we don't have to sacrifice anymore? Maybe he's a little bit crazy, or maybe he just doesn't want to do it anymore. Maybe he wants to start his own religion. Doesn't really matter his motives per se. But he comes up with this idea, and he says, look, God's actually already given us a sacrifice, a perfect sacrifice and now we don't need to sacrifice the animals anymore. And he brings this idea. He's like, maybe he had this dream, this vision. He brings it to his wife, and she's like, yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah, it's like, what animal is perfect? No, it was a person. And what man is perfect? No man is perfect. No, it's God's chosen one. Who's that? Who could be holy enough to have this perfect being? It's just God's son. It's the Son of God, sure. And the story starts out really simple. It's just very basic, and says, there's something that God, has a perfect son, or a perfect being that it sent spiritually and was sacrificed spiritually, so that we don't have to sacrifice our animals anymore. There you go. There it is. There's the answer. That's it. We don't have to do the tithing anymore. And his wife, it's an interesting idea. Maybe she adds some more ideas to it, because it's not much of a story. And maybe they bring in a friend of theirs, a friend of the family, a neighbor, and they're eating dinner together, and they tell this story, about this dream that he had, and now it's kind of morphed into a vision, and his wife's kind of adding on, and the friend's like, yeah, but he's kind of like, he's kind of had it with the Jewish ways too, but maybe he's kind of not very Jewish. He's been around the other mystery cults, kind of hanging out with them, listening to the doomsdayers say that the end is near. And, maybe that's kind of gotten into his head a bit, and he's kind of going along, but he's not completely on board. But it's enough that he, brings his friends in, and they all start telling these stories, and it's like a role playing game where they're all creating this story together. It's a joint storytelling where the story becomes established. There's certain lore and aspects that need to be preserved, and the key part is it's all an effort so that they don't have to give the animals sacrifices anymore, and thus, but they're still going to be fine. They can do other Jewish stuff if they want to, but they don't have to. But they definitely don't have to do that part anymore. And the guy doesn't even have a name. The Son of God, the Spirit of God, is a very nebulous idea. When it starts off as just God sends this perfect thing, and then it's a being, and then maybe it's an animal, no, it's a person. So it morphs, but it stays spiritual at first. It's a spirit that God sends. That's why nobody saw it. But eventually, as time goes on and more people get added, or as a generation passes and the story has been codified into living memory of these people who now are essentially their own mystery cult, that that it becomes at some point a person that actually has interacted with other people. Now that makes it way more of an interesting story. We'll throw in names. We'll make it, names of people that are famous, well-known, prominent figures, movers, shakers, whatever. And maybe some friends' names that we know, or some common names that we can all relate to. And more stories are added as time goes on. And different people, of course, different little subgroups break off from the main group, had enough, they're not that into it, and they make their own thing. And there's divisions and splits, and then there's disagreements and such, and maybe the original leader, he's still around, and the name hasn't really been established, and so he says, Emmanuel, the Savior, the Christ is, the Christ, yeah, and the Jesus name, eventually gets in there. Well, actually, Jesus is kind of a translation, anyways, but eventually it gets codified into a name. And as the time goes on, as people share the story, it becomes more developed. But you have different stories abounding in the time where Rome ruled supreme. And they center around these stories of the Christ who died for the sins. And, well, who's a great villain? Well, there's a couple of villains. They got to make the villains into, first of all, the Pharisees, the leaders, because they think that they know everything, but they don't know anything. So in the story, they have to be humiliated time and again by the Savior, by the Christ. So they have Christ showing up and doing stuff that messes with the Pharisees, throws around stuff in the temples. They try to quiz him, but he outwits them. They get egg on their face. The authorities try to capture him, but Christ is clever and is always escaping. And of course he's doing fantastical things. He's healing people, bringing people back from the dead. He's doing amazing stuff left and right. And the guy never existed. And it doesn't matter. Because everyone insists that no, yes, of course he did, and he died. And that was for so that we don't have to do the sacrifice anymore. And so if people ask, well, where is he? Well, he's dead. He left. He's gone. And that story maybe isn't that great, but it is a good story. It is interesting, and a lot of people believe it. And again, you have these factions, and maybe some of them say, "Oh, this is that Jesus is or Christ is still a spirit." Then there's those that say that the ending where he just dies, that's kind of boring. No, he comes back. That makes it better. And so you have that story in parallel. And that, loosely speaking, is the Christ's followers, who are growing in numbers because it is extremely popular to know that you are fine, you're going to be fine, without doing the sacrifices that the Jewish people need you to do. You can have this or that belief as long as you serve this master. That really, it's fine. That doesn't matter as much. And the end of the world stuff, because it's so popular, gets mixed in. Don't worry about today. Tomorrow's what matters. No, tomorrow's, don't worry about today. Tomorrow's not even going to come, You're not going to see, you're going to be there when the end comes, and this end is right around the corner. That becomes popular. So, it's just a story. Fully fabricated. None of the people in it are actual. The names are fluctuating. So at some point, someone said, we got to codify this because too many people are making too many claims. We have to, we have to decide what parts of the story are in and what parts are out. So someone hires somebody to write down one of the most popular versions of the stories. They combine different elements into it. And that original gets passed around to the few people that can read it, and they read it out loud, and now it's codified. And that story gains more traction. But the other stories still persist and exist until that story gets copied so that there's more than one, and maybe there's a couple errors in the copy, but a few words, it doesn't matter. But the other stories again still persist, so they, even though they have it codified, there's more than one understanding, and eventually some of those ideas will get codified into another story that will be added on to the existing story. But once that story needs to be distinct, and so somebody commissions somebody to write that down. Then you have another gospel, and over time this repeats, and then the copies, some of them get lost, destroyed, modified, changed, and eventually you have the remains of the earliest copies that we have, and these stories codified into a somewhat coherent storyline, where it seems like you have 4 different stories that all tell the same story from different perspectives. And they're all completely fictional. None of the events happen. And by now, they've added famous people into the mix. People that are known. Pontius Pilate, throw him in. Maybe there was a guy named Bartholomeus, whatever, and he was a well-known criminal. Throw him in. There was a Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, etc., and throw them in. And they were real people that were just movers and shakers. Maybe they were high ups in Christianity, or maybe they had nothing to do with it. They had their own trouble, and so when Acts gets codified, This is the continuing story of the disciples who are now kind of on their own adventure. They blend in what really happens to these people in with them being Christians, even though they're not Christians. We're just put that. And when the guys get killed, so they can't complain, they're dead. They can't refute it, and they're illiterate. They don't know about it. They or if they found out about it, they're too busy to refute it. Or even if they did refute it, nobody cares. It'd be like somebody writing a made up story about Joe Biden. He don't care. Well, he's the president. Maybe he would care. Uh, you know. But Tony Danza from Who's the Boss. Somebody writes a fictional story about him, and he's not gonna care as long as you're not slandering him. He's busy with other things. So that's it. That's the story of the stories. And that's what Christianity is. And why did it grow? Well, it grew in part because there was a lot of people in it. There was a lot of people in it because it kind of took a little bit of every mystery religion and absorbed that into its ideas. And it also was an alternative to the other popular religion of Judaism, which costed you way too much and made you an outsider. You couldn't eat what you wanted to eat if you were a Jew. But there is, of course, a story that's thrown in, and it's like, if it causes the other person to sin, don't eat something in front of them. It's like, worry about them. So it was this nice sort of like, inclusive messaging. But also that end times thing was kind of there too, and that appealed to a lot of people. So it was very popular. But it wasn't legal exactly for numerous reasons. And that actually increases its popularity. And we saw that in the Mormon church. They were persecuted. Uh, and that makes it more popular, more interesting to many people. It's like, well, I mean, they've got to be onto something if all these people are against them. It's like, of course we have the truth. That's why everyone hates us. And so there's an allure there. But then once one guy says, you know what, fine, Christianity is legal. Yeah, sure, I'm a Christian. Oh yeah, and yeah, no, that's going to be the state religion. Then it becomes hugely popular, insanely, explosively popular, because now the rulers are like, wait a minute, we can use this to influence people. And that's what happens. And that's the history of Christianity from my potential story that I've unfolded here. No Jesus required. No disciples required. The whole thing, from start to finish, is made up whole cloth. It's fiction. None of it's real. Not a bit. It uses some locations that exist, uses some popular names, but none of those people actually did any of the things or were at the places that they are claimed to be at. It's completely made up story, but people believe it because it's a good story. I think that that's possible. I think that that's very possible as an origin to Christianity. Why can't they find the body? There was no body. Not like that would have mattered anyways, because that's always been a shifting of the burden of proof. Well, Jesus is dead, but he rose again. Well, let's just produce the body. No. Show that he's risen. Well, he went back into heaven. Oh, okay, convenient. Just like the golden plates beamed up into heaven so nobody can see them. Right, very convenient. And there's still elements in the New Testament stories that suggest a spiritual Jesus. They're still sort of in there. And in fact, there are elements when Jesus returns that he returns not as a body, but as a spirit, because he walks through the walls. He walks right into this house area, cave, wherever it was that the disciples were chilling out in. So he doesn't seem solid, although he is solid when he needs to be. Characters, of course, appear out of nowhere and never heard from again. They're there for complete plot convenience. Thomas. Hey, never heard of him before. Who's he? Put your hands in my holes here. Okay, okay, I'm convinced. All right, it's good enough. And then we never hear from him again. Of course, other stories were tried. There is a Gospel of Thomas out there. There's a Gospel of Mary, and there's also these, but the church, in its power, the church, the Catholic Church, the church, the capital T and the capital C, said, nope, those aren't canon. Those are made up. Why? Well, because we said they are. They're forgeries. Well, the other stories are too. Well, no. Those ones count. Why? Because we said so. These ones are the real ones. Those ones, no. And even the scholars are like, yeah, that one's not really, like, that one was made up later on, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, dude, they're all made up. Why is this one more made up than the other made up ones? Why is the Gospel of Thomas any less or more legitimate than the rest of it? Well, there's the stories are stories. They are fiction. They are made up. They are not real. They didn't happen. They didn't ever happen at all, in my view. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Maybe. But I just don't I just don't see it. It's like, well, but Jesus could have been a real person and then they made him a legend. Yeah, maybe. But my point is, you don't need Jesus for the thing to become a religion. You don't need the disciples. You just need you need one person to come up with a simple story, tell one other person that sort of believes, get in another person, and then you got the ball rolling. And there you go. Away it goes. And that shared storytelling and evolution of the story is believed as reality rather than mythology. Once it's codified, once it's codified into writing and things are declared to be the actual story, you have a unity. Of course, that doesn't last. And we see that with all the different denominations, which started with Lutheran. He didn't like the Catholic Church and what they were doing. He made his own version. And it split off from there. And it continues to split. And that's happening in other religions and will continue to happen. It also happens with other belief systems that we have. Things that you think that you share in common with somebody, you can find out, wait a minute, actually, we believe different things about this. We both love this one song, but we both see it in a completely different way. And that can be very interesting and fascinating, but it can also divide you and cause a rift. And it is up to us to decide which way we're going to go. Are we going to go with the interesting that you think that way? I like that you think that way. Maybe I don't. I mean, I like the way I think of it better, but I understand what you think, and to accept that difference, or are we gonna split off? Can we find compromises? Can we find negotiation? Are there things that are not worth fighting over? What are the things worth fighting over? And then how do we fight over those things? And just declaring, I am right, doesn't work. You need some system. What is that system? Well, it's not storytelling. Storytelling is very powerful, but stories might not be true. Even my story might not be true. And if you were a believer in the stories, you might think, no, you're wrong. Fair enough. Maybe I am. What do I know? I am saying I'm just telling a plausible explanation. But the messages that you can derive from the story still have value, even if the story's made up. Of course, you can get value from lots of stories. You can get value from stories that are true. So why not get it from the true stories? Well, maybe you say, what's the difference? I don't know. I just value the truth more than I do, getting something from some, but then I can't really say that because it's like, well, no, I do value the lessons I've learned from fictional stories. I can't really put it, I value this more than that, but I do care about the truth. I do care about that, but how do I find the truth? How do I prove the truth? How do we get to the truth? And that's what the human story has always been. And that, at least, is true. Even if the rest of this has been my own ideas. Okay, well, there you go. There's my outline of Jesus' mythicism. Without going into technical stuff, I'll leave that to those that want to do that. Um, like I said, it's all tentative. Uh, I'm not saying this is how it happened. I'm saying it's how it could have happened. If you have a disagreement, post your valid and sound argument that shows that I'm wrong. Give me your evidence, your proof, your something in the comments and let me know. And if you don't have that, if you don't have any empirical evidence, repeatable test, or valid and sound argument, then I'm going to be skeptical of your conclusions. Thanks for watching.